Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. All right. This starts a pretty regular 1 hour hit on Sundays between John Middlekauff, a former NFL scout with Philadelphia, who has been obviously a regular on this podcast network since I think pretty much day one. Go Lowe's, his golf podcast as well. So, I was thinking about this, that when I built the volume, one of the things I think about all the time is I think of it a little bit like a swimming area, stay in your lane. Like there are things I know and things I don't. And we have a series of people. You're a football guy and a golf guy. Like everybody has sort of a lane. And it's worked that way. And I've seen that most of my life in corporate America. And in corporate America, when you have problems is when people think, a sales guy suddenly comes up and wants to talk to me about content. ESPN was famous for that. Here, I've got a segment I think could work well for a car dealership. And I'm like, I'll create segments. If you can sell them, you sell them. But Fox has never asked me to do a segment because they found a sponsor. Like that's not the way it works. It shouldn't work that way. So Belichick, prime example, got into trouble. He took over personnel. Pete Carroll in Seattle got into trouble. He and John Snyder. Once John Snyder, the last couple of years, took over personnel, Seahawks had back-to-back great drafts. They had several where Pete had influence, where they just kept missing on first-round picks. Rashad Penny, the running back's a great example where like everything was a reach. So when the players vote on the NFL Top 100, it's illuminating. It lets you look into what matters to players. They love athleticism. Lamar Jackson is voted the number one quarterback over Patrick Mahomes because he's viewed as hyper athletic. This is the NBA players, a majority thinking Westbrook's better than Steph Curry, despite the fact they're both guards. One can't shoot and has bad hands. Like the two most important things for a guard. Like, can you?
Well, look who likes him now. Jokic wants Russell Westbrook on his teams. Like, what are we doing?
So, it's interesting. I don't have a problem. I love Lamar. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but it's interesting. They have Dak Prescott ahead of Matt Stafford and Joe Burrow. Nobody thinks that. Like in the league, when you talk to personnel people, I mean, Dak struggles with the best offensive line for years in football to win a single playoff game. Burrow got to the Super Bowl with an egregiously bad offensive line. So in the days that you were working for the Eagles, I look at the top 100. I'm not offended by it, but it illuminates how players view the world. Hyper athleticism is viewed on a grand scale for players.
I just think the way personnel departments and coaches work in the NBA, if the Warriors are going to do something big, they talk with Steph Curry. Obviously, LeBron James has a huge hand in personnel, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you got to keep him happy. The most famous dynasty of my life, the Patriots, never asked Tom Brady's opinion one time. Now, it doesn't mean they shouldn't have it, but it never even crossed Bill's mind. Andy is not asking Patrick Mahomes, for his draft board, right? Or in free agency. Now, when a player plays somebody, if you play Lamar Jackson and he kicks your ass and you go, that was really good. Like that, there's something to be said. But in the NFL, you don't play every team. So in the NFC, only 4 teams in the NFC played the Ravens last year, right? It rotates every 4 years. So half the league is not even playing this player. And then there are teams in the AFC that aren't playing him either. Colin, this ranking, which I honestly have to fake even caring about, I do not care about this. And the Madden rankings, which had Lamar and Patrick Mahomes right here. Josh Allen is a better player than Lamar Jackson. Yeah. He's a better player. The Chiefs feared Josh Allen. They just played him both back-to-back playoffs on the road. They feared Josh Allen. They were excited to play Lamar. Again, that's not saying that Lamar's not good. They knew they could handle Lamar. Josh Allen has kind of owned them. This is in the playoffs. The reason the Bills haven't won was Sean McDermott, the defense, not Josh. To me, there is a gap. Again, Lamar's regular season, in the playoffs, he hasn't been remotely the same.
No.
And that's a big problem for a team that at this point in time, like, we're not judging the Ravens on 12 wins. 13 wins. Like, who cares? Like, yeah, I expect the Ravens to be in the playoffs. He's getting judged on those couple games, just like Mahomes. And that's the thing with Josh. He hasn't won, but I think we all go, not totally his fault, right? There were Peyton Manning games early when I remember being in like early in college and high school, and I loved Peyton. I was like, this doesn't look like the same guy I've just watched for 16 weeks. And that's how Lamar felt in the big games. Where Mahomes, he's like a chameleon. He's morphed. He was like one point in time, he was throwing like Dan Marino. Now he's like became a game manager this year because of his team. It's like he can do it all.
Do you know the one position that they have asked Mahomes' opinion in the draft? It's the one position Kansas City drafts poorly, wide receiver. So they have asked Mahomes from time to time for an opinion on college receivers. And I imagine they listen to him if they ask. Brett Veach drafts everything great except wide receiver. And my take is he has an influence. If you ask, because I heard they have asked Mahomes' opinion on wide receivers. Well, if you ask his opinion and he says, I like this guy, you're not going to avoid that guy if he's available. You're probably going to, and it's the one position where they've been really immature. Tony, immature. Rashee Rice, immature. Yeah. Xavier Worthy, I think that's his name, out of Texas. I mean, he's 160 pounds. I mean, you can jam him up on the line. He'll make spectacular plays, but
he's pretty talented.
He is. I'm not disputing that. But there's also video all over practice of him getting tossed around like a crouton in a salad bowl, just getting thrown all over the field.
Deshaun weighed 100. Now, Deshaun was more talented, I think, than this player. He went in the second round because there were a ton of question marks. When you have the elite speed, now Deshaun was a great route runner. I think a lot of people view Xavier Worthy as more than just a go route guy. If he can do everything else, Andy has a soft spot for guys with a little trouble. Like Andy's not afraid of those. Bill just wants to avoid that at all costs for the most part. Andy kind of embraces it. And I'm not saying like, and that's the Tonys, even Tyreek early on. Kelsey was a character guy coming out of high school. So I think Andy feels pretty comfortable that he can mold that. But overall, the quarterback ranking, you could not have an NFL quarterback ranking and not have Josh Allen second. And I take you seriously. Yeah. You can't do it. I think he's the second best quarterback. And honestly, like I have more faith in him winning. It's on the organization, but because I've seen him be awesome in the playoffs. I mean, say what you want about, the Bengals, who the owners, Ben Sheep, they have proven over the last 20 years, they've had moments with Marvin Lewis and Carson Palmer, some really good teams. With Marvin Lewis and the Andy Dalton teams. Like they can build a team. Joe Burrow benefited 2 years ago. Their team was talented.
I mean, Cincinnati is like the Chargers. They've gotten quarterback right a lot. I mean, the Chargers have gone Fouts, Breeze, Rivers, Herbert. I mean, go back to Kenny Anderson. Yeah, he was Cincinnati. Kenny Anderson, Boomer Esiason.
He played Joe Montana in the playoffs.
Kenny Anderson, Boomer Esiason, Carson Palmer, Andy Dalton, Joe Burrow. And those two franchises will drive you nuts, but they've gotten quarterback right more than they've missed.
How about even last year when Burrow goes down?
Jake Browning.
What's the quarterback? All of a sudden, Jake Browning, who I watched in college, I said, this guy couldn't play. And you're watching him last year, like, God, this guy's not bad. Yeah. So they developed.
Yeah. So I'll throw this out to you. So I didn't make a big deal out of it. I went to Twitter. So I was doing a show last week, and I got a call from through the years, an exceptional source, like 10 for 10, a former player in the NFL. And he said, next 48 hours, 72 hours, keep your eye on Brandon Aiyuk. He's going to sign a deal. So I just put it on Twitter. I said, hey, keep your eyes out for Brandon Aiyuk. Not in the moment, but next 2 to 3 days. Well, nothing has transpired. So, and it's funny because I've said this before. I didn't second source it. That's why I didn't make it into a big topic. I put it on Twitter. I had one source. I tried to get a second, but it was somebody that through the years has been just tremendously accurate for me. And I don't hear from often, but he's led me in the right direction virtually every time. So I haven't talked to him yet. So I'm kind of waiting for it. But give me an update, because they do have cap space. It's fascinating for all the stars they have, because they're paying Purdy what a cashier makes at Costco. I mean, he makes nothing by NFL relative to NFL standards. Where are you on Aiyuk, their cap space, and the rumors you hear?
Well, first and foremost, Trent Williams is more pressing than me. Like, if you had to choose
no
one guy's literally not there. Not only is he not there, He's 35 years old. He's made a ton of money in his career. In the back of your mind, what if he just called and said, actually, I've done enough. We've had enough success. I know I never won a Super Bowl, but my body, I'm just kind of over. That has to terrify them. So to me, that is priority. Like the moment Trent Williams did not show up, it went Brandon Aiyuk, you're no longer priority number one. And he already was really emotional. Like, I don't think Trent's that emotional about this. It's like, hey, guys, we all agree I'm the best left tackle. All these guys are now getting $28, $29 million. That's what I need. It was kind of like what McCaffrey did, right, this offseason. Like, listen, I'm not going to make a big stink of this, but I'm no longer playing for $10, $11 million. I'm not asking for 40 a year, but we better get this number around 20. Thing with Aiyuk, I just think it's really complicated because he's very emotional. I give him credit for showing up. Kyle's good at this. Kyle often goes like, listen, there's a lot of stuff flying around on the outside. I know these guys really well, especially my offensive guys. I'm very close with them. I played wide receiver, so they know how much passionate I am about that position. I've been around these guys from day one. I'm the only coach they've ever had here. So in a weird way, the Niners got more shit going on than like the Cowboys. Yeah. And they're just kind of numb to it. And I think this speaks to, John Lynch. He's a pretty rare operator. And one, he's not your typical GM. He was already rich when he took the job, and he's a natural leader. But these are not easy situations, and this goes back to, Jerry rides it out, and then ultimately I'll just pay my own guy the most, whatever. Right. The Niners and Parag, Jed's money guy, who has led them, they bought a team over in Europe in soccer. They have been, the Levi Stadium changed the wealth of that family.
Yeah.
Like Eddie DeBartolo was rich and his family was, but the Yorks were not on the same level. And they were not going to be able to sustain in Candlestick. And that thing changed everything. But they don't just hand you, this is George Steinbrenner, here's $300 million for, some star player. That's not the way. Look at last year with Nick Bosa.
Right.
They just don't operate that way. And listen, they take some shit, and rightfully so, because it goes, I understand if you're willing to you have a number where you're like, okay, we're just not going to get a deal done, which I don't think they do. No. So are you just, listen, I've been to going to these practices for years. Trent Williams is on a pretty cruise control training camp. Right. Like this ain't Junction Boys, Alabama, 1950 for him. But do you want him showing up week 10 days before week one? That has pulling a hammy or something written all over it. I don't care what he's doing. He's still in pads out there moving around. And the Aiyuk thing, like, how does he can work out all he wants with the trainers and stuff in the weight room. It's just not the same. And these are two of their they're probably, the Chiefs to me are the only team that can really go Super Bowl or bust. It was a disappointment. Yeah. But I do think there's a group of 3 or 4 teams, obviously the Bills and the Ravens with Lamar and Josh, and probably the 49ers, that anything less than a Super Bowl berth feels like a devastating blow. And so to me, if you're the 49ers, like, the number's not going to come back to you. He's not just all of a sudden go like, hey, I turned $26 million, 3 months ago, but now more guys have gotten paid. Now I'm good with it. But I also get the Niners spot. Like, we don't think you're as good as DJ Moore. We just don't think you're that good. And that's where I have a hard time with NFL markets and stuff. Like, whatever happened to, this is what we think you're worth. You're still under contract. This is not like you're just some free agent out there. So do you want to play on $14 million, or do you want to take our $75 million guaranteed? Historically, the guy usually cracks, but it does feel, and I had Jake Rosenberg, who was a longtime contract negotiator for the Eagles, on the pod last week, and he said, like, let's face it, these player empowerment in the NFL, it's not the NBA, but it's definitely amped up a little bit. And you see it all around the league. These guys, I'm not doing shit.
And it's also a lot.
That didn't happen with Parcells.
No, it's a lot of wide receivers who have always been the NBA players. They're the most talented athletes. It's sort of an independent position. You break the huddle first. You go up the sideline, throw me the ball when I'm not open. And I've argued this. Tyreek Hill just got a new 3-year deal. No New Year's added, just a pay raise. And I've argued this, and this is like matter of fact. Take your feelings out of it. The Chiefs have won back-to-back Super Bowls without Tyreek Hill. Fact. And I've said this about Tyreek Hill. I'm not a believer at all in dominant number one receivers, especially with a Brock Purdy, because Brock Purdy is not getting paid. If you have a star receiver getting paid a lot, there's sort of a psychology like, I got to feed this guy. This guy's got to eat. I remember Dak broke into the league with Dez Bryant. Dez left, and you lose that 9 touchdowns a year. but Dak to grow had to spread the ball around and see the entire field. And I do think with Mahomes and Tyreek, it became sort of he's always open. And it's forced over the last 2 years.
He was a lot.
But it has forced Mahomes to throw underneath, to take what the defense gives you. I think Mahomes has actually, I'll argue, has grown as a quarterback
100%
without Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill made his job much easier, and he's obviously naturally gifted. So if you want a young quarterback to grow, everybody's fearful of Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen. He's still a little bit in the growing curve where he's got to take more of what the defense gives him. So that's my knock on Tyreek Hill. Yes, he's fast, but he's a deep threat with a quarterback without a big deep threat arm. So he's flashy, he's exciting. I could think of 10 quarterbacks in the league where Tyreek Hill would be a better fit than Tua. And I think he's a terrific player. I don't think he's the best player, number one, like the players do in the league, but I think he's very, very valuable. But I am not a believer in this. If you're asking me, the Niners, I think their DNA is Shanahan, Trent Williams, Debo, and McCaffrey, and Kittle somewhat physically. I think Ayuk's just really talented. I think there's this bubble now with wide receivers where show me all the playoff wins for Tyreek and Justin Jefferson and Devontae Adams. Where are they?
Well, with Tyreek, I do think the Dolphins, he kind of had him by the balls because, like you said, he would be better off with a bigger arm quarterback.
Yes, no question.
Before, but they can't even dream of functioning without him and Waddle. I mean, when those guys go down, they look differently. And that the whole, once you double down on Tua, you can't get rid of him or it would look really bad. You want to make it look good. I do think the 49ers already kind of showed their hands. It was like, they got some needs. You know, Trent Williams getting older. You know, you can always go defense. And they took a wide receiver at the end of the first round. And now, big picture, maybe they already thought, hey, we get Aiyuk. That's Debo. Because he's more of an over-the-middle. He can break tackles. He's what Kyle likes. And ultimately, you can't have, this is not sustainable for the 49ers. Now, part of it is that guys are older too. But in the next 2 years, all these guys are not going to be on the team. And this is what the Chiefs did. Listen, it's an all-time move. Trading him. What were the Chiefs last year? A defensive team. How were they a defensive team? Well, Trent McDuffie became a superstar. Yeah. Karlaftis, they were able to invest in Chris Jones. Now, they had less on offense, but their quarterback had become like Tom Brady in terms of game management, and their defense was so great, they felt comfortable winning 20-17 or 17-13. And the 49ers are going to have to pivot off Kittle, Debo. One of these guys is not going to be there. And Trent's 35, 36 years old.
I said this before. I have the Rams winning the division. I thought they peaked last year. I think they're going through. I think it's noisy.
But those guys are still on the team, though. That's what I would say. So those guys are still. Now, the Rams are still dependent on young players. Kyle's dominated him. To me, there's questions. I know Purdy got hurt in the playoff game, but for the most part, like Stafford's health, given the way he plays, given his fearlessness and his age, I was thinking about this the other day because I want to do something. I haven't quite figured out what to call it, but some ranking of the quarterbacks. And I got to like 5 and 6, and I'm like, I haven't even thought about Stafford, and he's better than everyone I'm about to name. Like his high end
is through the roof,
undeniable. It's Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and he played like that down the stretch. It's why he took a team full of kids, with Cooper Kupp being a shell of himself, toe to toe with the Lions, who had the Niners on the ropes. So, yeah, I mean, I think both those teams are locked playoff teams, but the Rams had to pivot, and the Niners are going to have to pivot over the next 18 months with younger players, a lot like the Chiefs did, especially once you pay the quarterback.
Yeah. So I was thinking about, I've learned something through the years with men, and it's a big chunk of men. 40% of men, 40% of people never leave the area code they grew up in. I mean, you just made a pivot a couple of years ago. You're like, I'm going to Arizona. I can't. The San Francisco's outrageous, and I think you're a happier guy. Congratulations. Now is your fiance. Hey, are you not playing best ball at DraftKings? My opinion, you're missing out. DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest is their biggest fantasy contest ever, and that's saying something. They're taking $15 million and putting it into the prize pool. $15 million. 2 millionaires, not one, two, will be crowned each week. Still not convinced? Check this out. DraftKings offering everybody a draft one, get one special. Your $20 entry fee, and that's all it costs to get involved, $20. This is really nice. Gives you a bonus ticket. Get in on the best ball action. Download the DraftKings app. Takes 90 seconds. Use the code Colin, COLIN. All customers who enter the NFL Best Ball $15 million millionaire contest get a bonus ticket and get a shot at being crowned one of 2 millionaires, only on DraftKings. So I was thinking and I'm not, it's just people are different, and I'm not traditional, so I can move. My wife's the same way. We can move on a dime. And the kickoff rules, it's quirky looking, but just the new kickoff rules, think about it in terms of when they changed the PAT, it became a real play. Like one of those, your kicker misses one about every third week, unless you have the Ravens kicker. So 7 of 8 kicks were returned in the Hall of Fame game. 73% of kicks last year went through the end zone or were touchbacks. You get an extra play about 6 to 7 times a game. There were only like 4 kickoffs taken for touchdowns last year. It almost never happens. I don't.
Days are
yeah,
over.
I mean, like it may happen. It basically in the NFL happens every 6 weeks. It happens once. You don't even get that many. I mean, if a guy gets to midfield or the other team's 40, it's considered a huge return. So the NFL basically said, we just want more plays. So I said this on the air, is that the NFL constantly adjusts. Baseball did when it had to. I mean, Fox basically went to baseball and said, we're not really interested in signing you to another deal. Speed the game up. So
pick up the pace.
Fox literally told him how to tweak their schedule, speed the game up. ESPN, by the way, has no interest, from what I've heard, in re-signing baseball. Lachlan Murdoch, it's pretty clear in our building. It's not like baseball's a priority. Baseball has changed when it's fundamentally had to, or networks just don't want to do business with them. And they have sped the game up, but it's a different time, and it does still feel like it lacks juice and energy and pacing. So, but the NFL, in a leadership role, I always said this about Tiger Woods, #1 golfer in the world, #1 and changed clubs. Oprah Winfrey had the #1 ratings, and she literally changed her show to more of an ethereal, quality of life, elevation of life show. She was #1. Tiger and Oprah changed. NFL does this. #1, pulling away and makes changes. That's different from somebody going, John, if you don't quit smoking, you die. I'm not going to give you a ton of credit for quitting when the option is you're dead if you don't start exercising and stop smoking. So baseball is a little bit like change, or we're just not interested in re-signing you to long-term deals. So I guess my point is on the preseason thing, people can fight it, but John, I watched it and I'm like, it was the first time I can remember watching every kickoff.
It was fascinating. I'm totally behind doing out with the old because it was not working. But I watched, I'm kind of sick. I probably watch a coach press conference a day, different, throughout the league. I ran into Sean Payton's yesterday because you get the right coaches. They're giving you nuggets left and right.
All sorts of nuggets.
And I saw this a couple weeks ago, a headline that the Packers special teams coach, Rich Bisaccia, probably the #1 heralded special teams coach in the league, said the league might change things throughout the preseason. Sean Payton doubled down on that. So I think they've told everyone, and this is where they deserve credit. We did this, but we are not afraid to tweak it before week 1 if we see different things. Because Sean Payton mentioned this, and I do agree. There's a lot of moving parts with where the ball could end up. And he's like, it's hard to follow. It's hard for us, the coaches. It took us a while. The fans cannot follow this. Like if one goes out of bounds, if one goes through the end zone, and obviously if you don't get it to the front square, there are different yard lines. I think one's 25, one's 30, and one's 40. Might be 35. He's like, it's too confusing. Sean Payton's pushback was, I'm totally cool with this change of the formation, but just have one or the other, right? If you kick it out of the end zone or kick it out of bounds, it starts at the 40. And if you don't kick it to the square, start it at the 20. But you can't have too many complications, and I agreed with that. The one thing I think, again, it was preseason game, the Hall of Fame game. You could even have that in its own category. Like there's preseason and there's whatever the hell that is. I know it got rained out or whatever, but I mean the people playing. I thought there would be more just open lanes, and I'm not trying to take too much away. It felt like the offensive players, because this guy gets a running start 5 yards. I do have to back up immediately. And in the old rule, I had more space so I could back up and then attack. There's not really that much space. And there were a couple times when everyone just went by him and the offensive guy was swallowed. So, and I assumed the opposite. I was like, you're only going to have to make a guy or two miss. It's why, like, Deebo Samuel's like, I want in. Because in theory, you think it's going to be easy, but then you watch it in practice, you're like, maybe it's not going to be as, I would say, offensive as it's going to be harder than, and who knows, maybe we'll see all sorts of stuff. But Sean Payton said this. He's like, if you're kicking in the square and the average where they end up with the ball is at the 38-yard line over like a 2 or 3 week period, every coach is going to kick it in the end zone and start at the 30, right? We'll just play the numbers, which would be bad, which would negate everything they're trying to do. And the league obviously understands this. So they want it to be a play, right? They want
you know what I
think, which I do too.
Yeah. You know what I think is the disadvantage for the return team? So in the old kickoff, you've got rookies on that kickoff team. You got third string guys, undisciplined, get out of their lane. So you would see guys get out of their lane over the course. This is too short of a run up. So nobody gets out of their lane. It's a much more disciplined kickoff team. So when I watch that, I'm like, there are no openings. You have to make no, you don't have enough time to screw it up. You really don't have enough time some of these rookies are running full speed. They get out of their lane and whenever you see a kickoff return for a touchdown, you look at the replay, you're like, Jesus, you had two guys that were 12 yards out of their lane.
It's like the DB that dives for a pick or the basketball player that dives for the steal. You're like, you didn't need to do that. Now you don't even have time to do that, like you said, because you're only taking 6-7 steps.
So everybody stays in their lane. So my take is it's you can play younger players and not really worry about it. They get on you. Everybody's where they're supposed to be. But it is this is something I've said for years. There's an old saying. Basketball thinks about when it comes to change. Basketball thinks about it first. The NFL gets it right, and baseball makes the most money off it. And so baseball's always been money obsessed. Like that's all they care about, the ownership, just making money. So for them, any change is something that they don't want to, obviously baseball with the iPhone should take off 40 games per team, 120 games, end the season in, seriously, last week of July and be done by September 20th, season over, before the NFL gets rolling. It's over now. Between college, the Big Ten explosion and the SEC adding Texas, Oklahoma with the NFL. If you don't have the right October matchup, that shit's over. Like USC is opening with LSU and Michigan. I'm in. I'm out of baseball unless it's the Phillies, Dodgers, Yankees. I'm done. So baseball has always been one of those sports where they will very slowly make change. And I think what's happened in the last several years, the networks like Fox and ESPN have come up and said, guys, these games they're creating, these all-star games, the game in the cornfield, they're fascinating games. They're events, which, Philadelphia Phillies going to London, baseball would have never done that on their own. They were basically told, guys, you got to get some ratings here in the regular season. So when people confuse the two, football in a power position, and I love this, is just rolling the dice constantly. And I love it.
Yeah. Well, and when they screw up, they'll change. Like they remember a couple of years ago, Belichick's whole thing was we should be able to challenge every play. They didn't quite give him that, but they challenged pass interference. Clearly it wasn't working well. And they said, we're canceling this. So like if this kickoff rule is just an utter disaster, which I don't think it will be, but just in the hypothetical world it was, they would pivot to do something else. And that could be like week 3. I mean, they are not afraid to make hardcore changes, but I was pretty adamant in my mind that, like, I think we're going to see a ton of touchdowns. And then watching it, I understand it's Houston and the Bears, 4-string players, but like maybe it's actually going to be more difficult. And maybe you will be less inclined if the defenders are able to break free pretty consistently to put a Saquon Barkley, a Christian McCaffrey. Because my thought was like, put one of those guys back there. It's much more like a normal play. It'll just be like a one-on-one. You'll get tackled. But I wonder if it actually might be more violent. So you're more likely to put your backup running back or backup safety that has some moves. You're like, if this guy gets hurt, whatever. I am not risking Deebo Samuel back there on a 4-on-1 in the corner and have him get destroyed.
So a former NFL quarterback texted me after the draft, and I wrote this note down, and I have notepads all over my house, and I found this the other day, and I didn't bring it up, and it's really interesting. So
Tom Brady has some draft takes.
I'm not going to go there, but he said, "This is not a small thing. Caleb Williams, defensive coach, Jaden Daniels, defensive coach, Drake May, defensive coach, rookie." He said, and Michael Penix in Atlanta, backup defensive coach. He said, don't be surprised if Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy, with really, really bright offensive coaches in 1 year, if we don't look up and go, those are the best two quarterbacks. And this quarterback said, man, when you come into this league, and this quarterback spoke from experience, he goes, I had a defensive coach first. He said, it's a different language. He said, Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy are getting a master class level coaching experience that Penix isn't getting with a coordinator. Caleb's not getting. He said, this guy said, it's just, he goes, and he said this, he goes, people bang on Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson for not winning playoff games. He said, if you gave Josh Allen to Andy Reid, do you think he'd have a Super Bowl? And his thing was, of course he would. So it's just interesting is that we every year in this draft, John, there's a quarterback drafted below the star. And very rarely is the first quarterback taken the guy. C.J. Stroud 2, Bryce Young. So I'm not just saying now C.J. Stroud got a great coach, a great coordinator, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, they hit on draft picks. But your take on because Kevin O'Connell is highly respected. I mean, the tall Sean McVay. Sean Payton, I spent a lot of time with Sean. Sean is way too smart to be broadcasting. He has to be coaching. I think the best over bet in the league is Bo Nix at 5.5. Like, the O-line's pretty good. If the Franklin kid from Oregon works with Mims and Cortland Sutton, they have workable tight ends. Two backs I think are capable. What do you make of that? That the first-year rookie quarterback, the two with offensive coaches who are deeper in the draft, could be the hits.
Well, as I'm watching the Sean Payton press conference on my iPhone at 10:30 at night in my bed next to my future wife, she's probably thinking I'm a nut. He mentioned the name multiple times in Drew Brees. And obviously getting rid of the football is a big deal. And the other thing he hammered home is like, people act like I just want to dink and dunk, like that's the offense. No, we want to push the ball down the field. And that is the game plan. So I think the way that he talked about this guy in the press conference was a lot of love. I think he is really, really high. I think he liked his rookie class, the way he was talking. I think he's pretty excited about his team. This did not feel like, I think a younger Sean, Bill Parcells guy, if he's not happy, you can feel it. He looked pretty excited with the group he has. Doesn't mean they're going to win 11 games. I'm kind of out on Washington this year. Not because I don't think Jaden Daniels isn't really talented, but they're not that good. They haven't been. They got rid of multiple D linemen. Now, you could say Chase Young's a little overrated. Montez Sweat is not. So they lose talent there. They just are not as talented as, obviously, the Eagles or the Cowboys. That division's hard. The Giants have some players. And Dayball, you have, he has been coaching. Now he's calling the offense. I could see Washington just having a rough season, and that's where, of course they should. They've been bad. They're resetting. But when you're a quarterback and you don't have your play caller, and then all of a sudden is our offensive play caller good enough? Cliff Kingsbury, you see it a lot with defensive guys. They start getting pressure. Well, who do they point the finger at? The offensive play caller. When shit goes wrong, it goes to Kyle Shanahan or Andy Reid or Sean Payton or Kyle Shanahan, and they go, we'll fix it. And you go, yeah, they will. They'll figure it out. And that's where it gets difficult. I mean, New England, they feel a little bit like a shit show right now. No team in the league has spent less cash. I've read this and heard people say this over the last decade than them. I mean, that speaks, one, to the brilliance of Tom Brady and Belichick building a team. But also, I think there's a knock on the Crafts can be a little cheap. Yeah. They like to do the most with the least amount. Where I think a lot of teams like the Niners or the Cowboys, they'll spend whatever it takes to try to win. Like he's always, it wasn't just Belichick being cheap. It felt like a kind of a mandate. You have this rookie head coach who's not that far removed from being a player. You got this defensive star player who's underpaid that they had to kick out of practice. It's getting weird. Diana Rossini says, they've made an offer to Matt Judon. Then he's saying, bullshit. It's just, there's a lot going on. The quarterback situation, they have this major project. We've seen a million times what history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. I've seen Jacoby Brissett in a scenario on a bad team 30 times in my life. We know exactly how this goes. The record's terrible. Before Halloween, right around there, it's like, we can't take this anymore. Throw the kid in. The team's awful. And it can, Jared Goff, go the wrong way. And they got lucky. McVay came in the next year and saved everything. But it goes the wrong way with a situation like that. Like Gerard Mayo ain't calling the offensive plays. You can just see how it gets ugly. Even again, Dan Quinn, he did inherit Matt Ryan. It's a little harder with a young quarterback who, let's face it, Malik Neighbors looks like a bigger, thicker Odell Beckham from 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And the other wide receiver went in the top 25. And Brian Kelly got a pretty good history of developing offensive players.
Right.
I mean, that's at Notre Dame, at Cincinnati, and now here. So I don't know. I mean, Dan Quinn got and I like Dan Quinn. He did get a job with Matt Ryan and Julio Jones on the roster. So it just, they were kind of a little more, they were already good. I mean, Matt Ryan had already been in the playoffs. Julio
totally
was a star.
fair.
So it's a lot more difficult. And I was thinking about this today. If, in that Giants doc, when they tried to trade up from 3 to 6 and Elliott Wolf essentially at the end of the day said, no, unless you give me some Godfather offer, I'm not going to entertain it. If I told you Drake May was with Daboll, who spent the 4 years, with Josh Allen, you would like that scenario a lot more.
Yes.
But when you put a project on just a god-awful team whose coach, I mean, there's a decent, it doesn't mean he doesn't know football, but he's never been remotely close to a position like this. And now the fans are already turning on the owner because of everything that went on with the Apple documentary and the treatment of Belichick. It's just weird. It's hard to overcome that. I saw it when I was in college with Alex Smith. The Niners were just a joke. We used to joke in college, could Pete Carroll's team beat the Niners? And it was like, yeah, I mean, a lot of people would argue, well, they got about 15 first rounders, and this Niner team struggled to win like 4 games. And Alex went there, and his career was an embarrassment. And then he got real coaches, and what happened? You're like, Alex Smith's pretty good. And he's as mature and smart of a quarterback that has come in the league the last 25 years. It is really, really hard to overcome negativity, losing a coach who's not really comfortable. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying, like, I think it's so much easier when your head coach is the guy pulling the trigger on the play call. He impacts the game. I'd never quite understand, like, Sirianni. Like, what really is he doing?
I can't figure it out.
He's not calling a play. Not calling a play. Toughness. Like, let's say this about Dan Campbell. Like, obviously, he's adding an element of toughness to his team.
Harbaugh's are both doing
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're in a different category, but there are some guys, is Dan Quinn calling the defense? Is Gerard Mayo calling the defense? So if they take that part away, it's why when Robert Saleh gets the Jets job, he immediately goes, I'm not going to be the coordinator. It's like, well, what the fuck did I hire you for? Just to give rah-rah speeches? I mean, you had 2 good years as a coordinator, and now you're giving up the asset in which I hired you for. Part of being the head coach is you got to lead, you got to motivate, you got to run practice, and ideally call one side of the ball. That's what all these coaches do. There's a rare group of people. Harbaugh's a great example who can dominate. Bill Parcells. Most guys have to be pretty hands-on in this modern day of football, right? This is not 1987 where I can win most of my games 17-13. If I got the toughest guys, I can beat the shit out of them.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I do think fans don't think about a lot. People tend to think there's a salary cap. So all the teams have the same money. I was like, no, they don't. The Bidwells and Stan Kroenke in the same division. Stan Kroenke is the largest holder of residential real estate in America. You got homes in every city in the country, every place in the world you could think of. It didn't matter if it's Monaco, Saint-Tropez, Paris, Stan. Yeah. Steve Kime's a buddy of mine and worked for Michael Bidwell, and he won't badmouth him publicly, but we've had a few cocktails and the stories are, it's not a work environment I couldn't handle. I wouldn't have the ability to handle it. I just don't have the emotional DNA to deal with bullshit.
A lot of people don't. That's why they get sued a lot by former
Yeah.
employees, which is, I wouldn't say typical in the NFL with scouts and coaches and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
So I think fans sometimes think, with salary cap, everybody's the same. And Stan Kroenke can write checks. Like you said, the Yorks before Levi Stadium. They didn't have that kind of money. Yeah, Mark Davis
No.
just can't write. You have to have money in the bank to make these big free agent signings. And I think sometimes the Spanoses have money, but they're closest allies in the league are not the wealthiest owners. They're closer to Bidwell and Mara than they are Stan Kroenke, the really, really rich guys. And I know Dean a little bit, and that they're real estate guys. They're not tech guys or, Jerry, not
Arthur think how much money Arthur Blank
or
has.
Stephen Ross, the tycoon down in Miami.
Yeah.
And so the Chargers are a great example. They drafted very well. They've always done better than average on quarterbacks, like the Bengals. They were always cheap on coaches. They just didn't spend the money on coaches. I mean, you can go through it's college guy Mike Riley, it's coordinator here, and I think Harbaugh. That's why I think Harbaugh. And I told Dean this. I said, Dean, it's like a Rubicon. You guys burst through it. You literally went to a place you'd never gone where you're going to have one of the 2 or 3 highest paid coaches. And he told me, he said, it's changed our building. He goes, there's no negative to so far. He just elevate the optimism, the wisdom. And it's interesting because I look at the Chargers and people kind of lament their wide receivers. But John, I think we talked about this. San Francisco, it was Crabtree and a bunch of guys. Michigan just won a natty with Colin Wilson. They didn't throw the ball. If you look at everywhere Harbaugh has been, I mean, you can go to Stanford, Doug Baldwin. They've never been great on the perimeter offensively. His teams have always had one shortcoming, not a great group of wide receivers. I don't think it's crazy to suggest the Chargers are going to be a top 3 seed in the AFC. I don't think it's crazy.
It shows you, though. I mean, the other day, now granted, it's not like a ACL or anything. They are pretty dependent. If Herbert were to miss a month or something, like and he's great, and I am a Jim Harbaugh loyalist. He would struggle to win games with this iteration of the roster. Maybe in a couple years, he can't win with Easton Stick.
Yeah.
Like you could lose the Raiders, you could lose to anybody you're playing, let alone the good teams. If Herbert is healthy, I do think they can win double-digit games. And listen, I think there are a lot of people with the Chargers over the years. We put out clips and podcasts. I've been hard on them. And they probably don't like me. And I am not anti-Charger, but like you said, you can't be taken seriously as a real organization and constantly try to hire the cheapest coach. And Anthony Lynn's a nice guy. People love the guy. He should not be your head coach. Brandon Staley, I mean, I made it very clear where I stand on that one. And even before, Mike McCoy, who had a little moment, but then it was like, you can't beat Andy Reid and these guys and Belichick with this guy. You got no shot. And part of it was they were never fishing on that part of the pier, right? They were only kind of messing over there. And whether they got lucky, regardless how this ended up happening, obviously Jim, California guy, had coached in San Diego. It worked out. I give them credit for making this and making him your head coach because it can change the franchise. But like part of this now is, and I think Andy has really got Clark Hunt, who obviously Andy and Mahomes, they've made him a lot of money over the last 6-7 years, right? Historically, he was known as a really cheap guy. And I would say the Hunt family is not Gronky or Paul Allen or just unlimited money. But now they've gotten a lot more aggressive, clearly, with paying Andy and Veach, even stuff like that. And to me, that's the next level of the Chargers of like, you can cut these checks because you can get players. You can fudge the salary cap however you want. And like you said, I wonder if we did a research project of Jim Harbaugh, the player, just thinking in my mind. I wonder if some of the good teams he was on as a player didn't feel like they were running out Randy Moss and Jerry Rice at wide receiver. So philosophically, the way he's played and coached, we know it works. And now it's on, like, there really aren't any excuses with the Chargers now, right? The knock has really been for the last 10 years. Like, look at who you're rolling out at coach. We know you can get the players. Joe Ortiz from the Ravens. It's pretty scary, though, Colin. This is something I've never missed. And, in the profession you were in long before me, we have so much more control. Like, I control how successful we are, how many people listen, like, by my content, how consistent I do it. Like, in football, even as the head coach, guy breaks his leg in the middle of practice and he's a star player. It's like, I get you get numb to it, but you don't get numb to certain players getting injured. And that's all of a sudden he's in a boot for 2 weeks. That just rattles you. Even if it's like, oh, it's plantar fasciitis, it's not the end of the world. I can't imagine it just sent chills up with everyone in the Chargers. They're like, this, we have pretty high hopes this season to be competitive and be a wild card team. And just, are we sure? Because part of it, I heard Daniel Jeremiah maybe even run him a little more, play him a little like Josh Allen. And you start getting feet injuries, just freaks me out. I was going to bet a lot of money on that over under, Colin. This is one of those, guy misses, 2 weeks in a boot for this. What if it crops up again? And all of a sudden you got to miss 3 weeks in a stretch where you're playing the Chiefs, Ravens, and the Cowboys, or whatever their schedule is, you'd be screwed.
All right, John, I've been told you have a college football topic for me.
I was thinking about this. I was driving around. I listen to when I'm in the car, I have Sirius XM.
Same.
And I'll go around some of like college radio and hear like Neuheisel, and they'll just be like really nitty gritty on college football, which you don't really get that many places. And obviously the NIL and the financial world of the sport has completely changed. And forever, when I was growing up in the 90s, the main sweet teams, Miami, Nebraska, whoever was good in the Pac-12 or Pac-10 at the time, like their television presence, UCLA was really good when I was a kid. They were on TV all the time. And it was a huge, kind of game changer. And then as everything kind of changed in the 2000s and now it's all about money. And they had an ACC guy on and he was like, SMU and a couple other teams went into the ACC and they're like, we don't even need a share. We don't even need money. And SMU, and I saw the Baylor coaches were wearing this, we pay players. Some of these programs, like UCLA, in theory, you're like, oh, LA, a bunch of money. They couldn't even dream of investing the money SMU or Baylor would invest.
Chip Kelly told me UCLA was 12 out of 12 in the Pac-12 for NIL. 12th.
So do you think moving forward, obviously the big dogs, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Bama, LSU, but could we see a couple teams like an SMU all of a sudden be like, how are they getting these guys? Well, their budget is double the size of everyone except Oregon, Ohio State. And I do wonder if over the next couple years, we would, because of the last 15 years, put certain teams all the time in the playoffs. And I wonder if we could see some curveballs, because I know we can't do pay to play. Well, bullshit, that's happening. And so if SMU has an unlimited checkbook like Dan Lanning or Ryan Day, they're going to have a seat at the table because that's getting you players now. And maybe one of these SEC programs, like, does Alabama have the money that some of these other programs have?
They don't.
No. So it could change. And you go, well, Nick Saban clearly wasn't losing a step because I didn't think his team was that talented and almost beat Michigan at the Rose Bowl. I wonder if he realized I'm not going to be, we're just not going to have the funds. I'm out.
Yeah. I think two things happened with Nick. One, the last 2 years, he started complaining about NIL a lot. He had lost several players to Texas. Remember when Texas played Bama? I think was it last year?
They played them back-to-back years and they beat the shit out of them last year.
And when you watch that game, you went, oh, Texas is much bigger than Alabama. It's the first time I saw that in 20 years. Texas had 5-star offensive linemen. If you'd have switched jerseys 8 years ago, it looked like Bama did when they would face a Pac-12 school or a Big Ten school. They were just bigger, faster, and stronger. And those were players he was losing. The number one booster in the state of Alabama is Bear Bryant's son. There's not this depth of income. There's like 3 guys with Arkansas. Actually, Arkansas, the state, has more money than Alabama because they have 3 huge. Now, surprisingly, Walmart, like the Waltons, don't give to Arkansas. People think they don't. They really don't.
Isn't Tyson Food's guy?
Tyson, I don't think Tyson gives as much as people think. There's another group that gives a lot of money. I talked to Eric Musselman. Some of this stuff is off the record. USC coach. He used to be Arkansas. So he said, Walmart's not opening things up. But I always had this theory that because of Silicon Valley, all those graduates that went to Washington, Stanford, UCLA, Cal, it takes one guy to just say, I'm going to give $28 million a year to Cal. Now, Stanford, because Stanford and Cal are hard to get into, right? So I don't know what you could do. But I've thought about that before, is that Maybe tech guys aren't big football fans, but I thought
I don't
when the
think
NIL started, I thought, oh, this is going to help the Pac-12. It's not going to help rural Alabama teams. It's going to help. And listen, USC, the biggest collective is Oregon with Phil Knight, which is basically unlimited. USC's, I've been told, is 13 to 15. And I think they've done, Jen Cohen, the new athletic director, who I talked to recently, we had to sit down. They've really done a good job as a university. The university deserves credit. The big boosters, there's 2 or 3 really excellent, smart, savvy boosters. USC collaborative, you don't have this power need for constant power and validation. So Jen's really happy with their collective group, but UCLA, they got nothing. They don't have any money.
well, I'll give you a program, and again, it's a small sample size, but I know a couple people that old guys through family friends, through my uncle knew a guy that was his mentor, former players at Notre Dame in the 50s and 60s. One passed away now, that were 9-figure guys, and they were huge. You could only do so much in the past, right? Give money for weight rooms. Now, I mean, isn't Notre Dame a program that you talk about Silicon Valley? Like, they got a lot of high level finance guys. I mean, you're talking guys worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And you're right. All it takes is one individual to go to one of these programs and just love football, to go, hey, I'm worth a couple billion. I start the next Nvidia or whatever, and I do that. And that's where the old school oil money in Texas, like, they got that built in, because those guys love football. They love being part of the program. They love being talked about as part of the program. And they got so much damn money, giving them an extra $15 million a year is a line item that they don't even notice on their tax return. So I do think, get ready for, we're going to see some teams that, like, God, what happened to that team? It's going to change the landscape, because recruiting, it's what is being a good recruiter anymore? I think every college coach would tell you the majority of them come down to the checkbook.
Yeah.
And now with the transfer portal, even if you land a guy, you don't land a guy, it's like there's just so much craziness that the big money teams, and some of them that haven't been able to flex their muscle, because who cared how much money SMU had before? Even Baylor, it's like, well, who's to say they can't get a seat at the table now? All of a sudden, they're getting some 5-star defensive linemen because they're willing to pay. SEC's giving them 600 grand. They're like, hey, we'll double it. You do that enough times, word gets out. You start funneling guys to a certain place. Word gets out. That's how it happens.
I had dinner this week with an executive that negotiates contracts with leagues, and we were talking about this. And this person was talking about the NFL lawsuit, with DirecTV, and the prosecutors are sort of arguing that, hey, let's do it the way college football does, where there's parity. And the truth is, what the NFL argued is, there's no reason to change what we do. We actually have parity. Small markets win bigger than big markets. Bad teams, Houston, can turn around with just the right 2 employees, a quarterback and a coach. And this executive was saying, college football's always been have and have nots. He said, it's going to get so much worse. He said, college, and I said, worse than Clemson, Ohio State, and Bama being in the national championship literally every year for a decade. And he said he thinks what's going to happen, it's going to be about 8 schools. And worse being a feeding frenzy. Oregon's going to remain in there as long as Phil Knight's there. I think on the fringes, USC will be there from the West, but it'll be Texas A&M if they can get the right coach. Ohio State, I think Michigan, I think Notre Dame, Georgia for sure. Maybe
like Clemson, they're a program. Do they have enough money supporting them? I mean, I can't speak to knowing every one of their boosters, but
I will.
On the surface, it would go, they're a program that could fall behind.
I think people, and I was talking about this with the executive. I said, I think if you look at all the scholarships, college football's always had this fear that it's getting top heavy. They used to give out 125 scholarships, and they cut it down to 85. Bama put up the biggest dynasty ever. Is that the truth is, there are just some brands and schools that care more, and they may have stretches. But I mean, if I said to you the 8 best college football programs ever, one of them's SC. They have a great collective now, and Lincoln Riley. Oregon in the last 30 years because of Phil Knight's been an excellent program. Ohio State, Michigan just won a natty. Notre Dame irrelevant. Georgia, Alabama, LSU had Brian Kelly. And, Clemson or Florida State have always been in the running. Things really haven't changed. I would argue Oregon is the only new blood that's a blue blood. Of all the college football powers, Oregon the last 30 years is the new blood. And they had their T. Boone Pickens, except Phil, because of sports apparel, such a diehard sports fan. But NIL.
And what year Nike incorporate? Like early 80s, right? And really took off early 90s with Michael Jordan, or I guess mid to late 80s.
Yeah.
Like that's all those programs were established before that point. So if Phil Knight had started that in the 50s, they would have been right there. It's just because of him.
So I think, and I was just talking to this executive, and we were just going around. We weren't really debating. We were just, and my take is, when I drove home after dinner, my take was, college football, more than any sport in my lifetime, anyone, has always been lopsided, and I've never loved it more. I don't seek parity. I don't give a shit. The bottom line, if you give me the top 12 brands, I don't care what TCU does. I'm nothing against them. It's a beautiful little town, Fort Worth. But my take is the NIL, the transfer portal, guess what? Bama, SC, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Georgia, LSU, all Oregon now with Phil Knight, they're all going to be in that playoff every year.
Yeah, I think they're still led what college basketball used to be, because so many of their coaches have retired. They are star-driven. We get to know their players because they got to stay there 3 years, and their coaches become stars. So the reality television of college football is a two-prong, lead with the coaches and the players. In college basketball, all the great coaches have retired. I mean, there's still a couple, but for the most part, the legendary guys are gone, and we don't get to know the players. Because I was thinking about this watching the Olympics. I feel like the Olympics in the 90s was incredible, like Michael Johnson, some of the big moments.
Yeah.
And then I felt like it dropped off a little bit. And then I think the way we consume everything, obviously football benefits the most from this, the scarcity. Every event feels big, college or pro. Every game matters. And they got stars. Is like this Olympics has a lot of star power.
Yes.
I don't care. I don't know nothing about gymnastics. I know who Simone Biles. I like swimming a little bit for a workout, but beside Michael Phelps, I don't care at all. But Katie Ledecky, like I'm kind of checking out. Scotty Scheffler wins the Olympic gold. Djokovic, and it just felt really, really big. I saw the NBA when they played Jokic's team did 11 million people. 11 million people never watched the NBA Finals this year. I think the Olympics is on the comeback trail. At least this, just stars.
No, I think
feels big, easy for women and men to watch. It's just it's an easy watch.
Yes, and the other thing, and this should be noted, I've said this about TikTok. If TikTok, because it got banned because of its connection to China, if America said we're banning it except for culinary TikToks, and it lost 80% of its followers, but the only people that went to TikTok went for culinary would own a singular platform in the country. John, over the last 8 years, television is sports only. Now, we'll get some politics this year. Trump obviously drives numbers. But everybody keeps telling me TV's dying. And I'm like, yeah, but the industry we're in owns all of it. So if cable goes from FS1 goes from 90 million subs to 64, they're all now true sports fans, or you've gotten rid of cable. The only reason to keep it now is college football, college basketball. So I look at it. So when I look at the Olympics, if you have a TV in America, you have it for one reason only: sports. That is people used to pay for cable for 30 years and nobody watched it. Like, it was the biggest con. It was the biggest grift in TV. ESPN built an empire. Half the people paying them didn't consume their product. It was a grift.
That's crazy.
So like, I think about what's happening with the Olympics now is television. People have been telling me newspapers were going to go under for 30 years. A year and a half ago, they sold The Athletic to the New York Times for $450 million. The New York Times has never made more money. The Washington Post has never been more relevant. Forbes. The Summer Olympics, I felt the
little guy's been knocked out. Would you agree? The little newspaper, the Sacramento Bee,
they're
or
all
something
done.
like that, destroyed.
But to your point, you now go if you want to watch if you love big sporting events, it is still TV runs our world. And I think that's been the benefit, is that people that have TV, they're Olympic viewers, older on average, older viewers, women watch the Olympics. And so I felt like you. I felt the Olympics had really made a downturn. And these are, it's on everywhere I go right now. Restaurant, bar, friends, pharmacy. All I see is the Olympics.
And I think the Summer Olympics is more relatable than the Winter Olympics. I think the momentum of this Olympics going into 28 in LA is going to feel massive. I think this is, and it's why I defended NBC for Peacock. Remember, they got so much shit for putting, it's like, does everyone understand? Once my parents' generation is gone, no one watches NBC besides for the football game on Sunday night. Like, for them to survive, they have to get this streaming service to work. I've spent a lot of time on Peacock watching. I mean, they give you every option. You can watch whatever you want. Like I enjoy Peacock. But again, I think this Olympics, not that I care about any of these sports, really, beside golf and basketball. I have been glued. I mean, I'm watching handball. And I also think that some of these sports that you go, this is kind of stupid. Why is this there? You do need more inventory for an event everyone's watching. You can't just have one relay race and everyone goes home.
Right.
You do need more. They're only going to add sports, right? Football going in. That's probably smart business. This is when everyone's watching. Nothing is going on right now. I mean, nothing.
No, and what's happened is Sean McVay killed the NFL preseason when he wouldn't play anybody, and they went 8-0, and everybody just, all the young coaches, like, what are we doing here? I remember I was talking to my bosses at Fox, and I said, football now, because college football is so big, I'll work 7 days a week now for the next 7 months, starting Labor Day. I'll work Labor Day weekend. I'll work 7 months, no days off. I'll get a couple in Thanksgiving, but I'm glued to the TV. Those are big football, college, and pro games. And I said to them, after the NBA finals, and we don't have the NBA and never would at Fox, I said, I could take July and August off, and I don't think it would affect anything. And my bosses said, take it. And I said, well, I have radio. So at this point in my career, I'm not going to take July and August off. But if I only signed a TV contract, John, I would do TV and I would do this. And if I just did television in the volume, Fox would be like, take it off. We don't care. And for the record, we have the Olympics, we had Copa, we had the Euros, and we had the Caitlin Clark story. Next year, 3 of those 4 are gone, and the buzz around Caitlin Clark may not be as magnificent. So this has been,
it won't.
This has been, to me, like the rare, great summer of viewership. I think we're moving into a time that if it's not an Olympic year or maybe a Copa year, we're a 10, and we are so dynamic as a country for 10 months now. There's so much money in everything that July and August it dies. This may be one of the last great July, August sports of. Now, again, we'll have the Olympics again. LA Olympics will be big in 28. That'll be a great year.
Yeah.
But you're going to get these 2-year periods where it's just nothing happening.
Totally agree. I'm on board.
Yep. John Middlekauff. Good seeing you, buddy.